Hey guys, and welcome to episode 168 of Stand Up. Joining me today, Barry Ritholtz on the state of the economy, John Avlon on politics and the election, and listener and mail carrier from the U.S. Postal Service out of Boston, Joe the Mailman. I'm Pete Dominick. Time to stand up with me right now. Well, hello. How are you? Welcome to episode 168, the second episode. I am taping in the not yet finished Shedio, the DFAB. Call it the DFAB, named after Nick DiFabrizio, longtime listener, longtime subscriber, all-around generous, very interesting, intelligent guy, Nick DiFabrizio, who helped me all along the way, along with so many others. Thank you for your support. If you are a subscriber to this podcast, and if you're not, what are you waiting for? Go to patreon.com/Pete Dominick, or just head on over to the show notes for today's episode, and you can sign up there for as little as $5. Thursday night, we'll be hanging out. Would love to see you there. So you got to sign up, and you'll get an email, or you can go to the website, patreon.com/Pete Dominick. If you are a subscriber, you can get the details and the link to the Zoom Hangout Thursday, 8 East. Looking forward to seeing you then and showing you around all 72 square feet of the studio. It's 9 by 8 feet shed that I'm in, and I love it. Love it. So excited to be here. Still a little bit of a ping off of my voice because I haven't put up the sound suckers, the foam, you know, that you put up in studios, recording studios, as well as a carpet. I got the carpet today, and I'm planning on putting it in tomorrow, but I'm hoping to see new subscribers. Marilyn Durek signed up today with a $5 subscription. Thomas McKenzie became a $5 subscription. He didn't come, so that's a weird way of welcoming you. Thomas McKenzie came. I don't know. I mean, hopefully he did. Hopefully he signed up and he came. I'm leaving it in. I'm leaving it in the podcast. Melanie Bruce also edited her pledge from $5 to $15, edited it up. You can always do that. Thank you very much for supporting the podcast. This is independent media. It's as good as anything out there because I've got reach. I may be a small fella, but I know a lot of people, and I know how to get them on the phone, and they trust me, and they want to talk to me, and they look forward to talking to me, and I always, of course, look forward to talking to them. I've been wanting to talk to somebody who works for the United States Postal Service, preferably a mail carrier. And I mentioned something, and Joe, who's a longtime listener to the show, contacted me, and we touched base, and I've got him on the show today, whenever you're listening. I don't know what time you're listening, but Joe the Mailman, Joe the Mail Carrier, coming up right after I'm done rambling away here. 77 days until the election, and there's a lot that happened today. 177,000 Americans now died of coronavirus. Nancy Pelosi has recalled the House from their summer recess to vote on legislation to block changes at the Postal Service. See, Congress can do something. Also, the Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy is his name. He agreed to testify at an urgent hearing before the House Oversight Committee. Also, at least six states are preparing to sue the Trump administration to prevent operational changes and funding lapses to the U.S. Postal Service that could affect voting in the 2020 election. And finally, President Trump suggested today that the FDA should approve an untested experimental coronavirus treatment, despite no public data or peer-reviewed research showing that the experimental botanical extract has ever been tested. It's called oleandrin. He still says that this stupid thing, it looks like an essential oil to me. It sounds like one, should be marketed as a dietary supplement or approved as a drug to cure COVID-19. I mean, you know where this came from? The MyPillow guy, who is a prominent Trump donor. He has a financial stake in the company that develops the extract, and he told Trump about it. And Trump's like, okay, all right, that sounds great, Mike. All right, if it's as good as your stupid fucking pillows, then I think we're all in for a real treat. Okay? What have you got to lose? It is what it is. The president's brother died, by the way. Did you hear about that? Yeah, his brother died, and he went golfing. So he seems to be pretty broken up about it. And in his eulogy of him, he basically said that he was my best friend, and that's pretty much all we know so far. 42% of Americans approve the job Trump is doing as president, which is insane. A slight improvement since June. 50% of Americans have a favorable view of Joe Biden, and 52% see Kamala Harris favorably, compared to 42% favorability for Trump and 44% for Mike Pence. Really? 44% of Americans approve of Mike Pence, according to an ABC News poll. 58% of voters who support Joe Biden say their vote is more in opposition to Trump than in support of Biden. It's got to make Joe Biden feel good if he sees that. And speaking of Joe Biden, the DNC kicked off last night at 9 p.m. The theme, We the People, started at 9 p.m. East. It goes through Thursday. Last night we heard from Michelle Obama, Bernie Sanders, as well as other leaders. And you can go to demconvention.com and, of course, watch the clips everywhere that you have an internet connection. All right, let me get to my first guest, and let me just say thank you again for listening and for learning along with me each and every day. I'm hearing from so many of you all the time, and I greatly appreciate all of the correspondence, all of the support, and much more. I want to read one email from a listener named David, who yesterday had a professor from Yale, an immigration professor named Christine Rodriguez, and we were talking about the Hastert Rule. Have you ever heard of that? Well, the Hastert Rule is not a congressional rule, David emails. He says it's a pure partisan obstruction used by John Boehner to prevent guaranteed passage of comprehensive immigration reform. We don't have, quote, Washington gridlock. We have prevention of bipartisanship. We have a bipartisan legislation written every session, and because of this stupid rule, it doesn't get passed. I wrote to you about this years ago, Pete. It must be called out. Well, David, I did it. I read it to everybody. There it is. I've called it out, and it's a really good point that you make. So thank you very much for that. Also, Clark emailed me and said, just wanted to say I appreciate that you've never been a corporate shill, that you trust the goodness of people who will pay $5 or $10 or $25 on Patreon. And with every other podcast I listen to, I need to dive on the 15-second advance button on time to not listen to their live reads. And he went on and on about that. But anyway, I really appreciate that, Clark. Thank you very much for the email. A bunch more emails and Patreon messages. And Kevin, one more. Kevin said, if I were to only buy one of Kenneth C. Davis's books, which would you suggest? I think the Orig, Kev. I think just go to don'tknowmuch.com. And, of course, Kenneth C. Davis on yesterday's podcast, don'tknowmuch.com. And I would say just get Don't Know Much About History. If I were to buy one book, if I had to choose one, I would get that one. That's the original one, the OG Kenneth C. Davis. I love that book. That was what got me interested in his work. Okay, coming up, Barry Ritholtz, John Avlon, but right now it is Joe the Mailman. I love to interview experts and policy experts and the smart people I find, but so many of those people are you. I want to have conversations with folks who aren't media experts, but know a lot about their field, or they have a lot of experience or credibility, or they just want to chat and have a good, thoughtful conversation to remind you that you're not alone and to stay connected. And Joe and I had a great conversation. He is a mail carrier up there in the Boston area, which we established. And here is our conversation right now. So I've got Joe, the letter carrier, joining me now. And Joe has been a letter carrier for the United States Post Office for 16 years. Is that what you refer to yourself? Is that the correct term, letter carrier, not mail person or postal delivery person?
Right, yeah. We usually get referred to as letter carriers. That's what the company calls us. Out on the street, they just call me Joe the Mailman. That's what the customers call me.
To prove that you are, in fact, Joe the Mailman or a letter carrier, have you ever had – how many run-ins have you had with dogs?
I have run-ins with dogs daily, and I've been bit 3 times.
Oh, no. Oh, anything severe, anything terrible? And what is it?
No. Usually they're just small little dogs nipping at your ankle. The owner opens the door to grab a package or something. They sneak out, and they take a little bite out of your ankle.
I'm so sorry that I'm laughing.
That's okay.
So how has your job as a letter carrier changed over the years? So tell me a little bit about the job itself. Like you go in, you go to the post office, you do some kind of a sorting, or is it sorted for you and then you just take it and go out on your route?
All right. So when I first started, you would get to the post office, you'd punch in, you go to your route, you'd grab all the mail, and you would sort most of the mail yourself. There wasn't a whole lot of automation when I first started. There was some letter automation, but most of it we would sort ourselves. And through the years, they found ways to automate and sort the magazines and stuff. So I go in, I sort the mail, I pull it down, I grab the trays of the mail that's already been sorted by the machines, and then I hit the street.
And when you say you hit the street, do you have a vehicle? Do you ride a pony?
I drive what we call an LLV vehicle, a long life vehicle, and it's kind of like a Jeep. It's I think if you like watch TV shows and stuff, you see kind of what it looks like, the white little Jeep type van.
Why did you go into this? Why did you pursue a job at the United States Post Office for a career?
Okay, well, I started off, I was in corporate America, and I was working my way up, and I was getting pretty good at sales and stuff and making pretty good money. And what I was doing was I was trying to put myself through school to be a school teacher. And then all of a sudden I'm making more money than I could ever make as a school teacher. And I was young and kind of dumb, and I kind of quit school. And then not too long after, I realized, you know what? I don't really like corporate America that much.
Got it. I get it. So then you left, but you couldn't go back to school at that point?
I could have went back to school. So while I went back to school, I started selling real estate. And then once again, I started making good money in real estate. And while I was doing that, I saw a posting for the Postal Service. And I just thought there was just something about it that I said, I want to try that. That might be for me. And I went in, I took the test. A few months later, I get a call back that, hey, you passed the test. If you want to come in, we have orientation. And I gave it a try, and I really loved it right off the bat.
Do you still like it?
It's the best job I ever had. It's got its challenges, but it really is the best job I've ever had.
I think it would be a great job for a lot of people. I bet you I'd enjoy doing it. You're talking to people. You're outside. You don't have to be around a lot of other people all the time. You're doing. I mean, I don't know. I just like being outside and being around people. So
exactly. This is the way it goes. You go into the office and you work, and there's management there, and they're kind of like old. None of them have really worked a lot outside of the Postal Service, and they all use a sharp stick. None of them use the carrot. But once you get outside of the Postal Service, you're out in the community, in the neighborhood, it's great. You're on your own. The people love you. You get to know the kids. You get to know the dogs. You get to know all the families out there. And it's great. It's great for my personality.
Does the mail carrier know more about us than we know about ourselves? Like, do you know, this is the guy who's really into model trains?
I'm not going to say that on the work floor that we share information with each other while we're sorting the mail about what's going on. There may be gossip going on, but who knows? But we do. Just by delivering the mail, you get an idea of what you think is happening in a household or with a person. You don't really know, but
right. You make assumptions, and you probably have fun in your mind with them.
That's right.
And it's probably also fun to have them proved right or wrong. How much drugs do you think you're actually moving without knowing it?
It's so funny because I'd never thought about that much, and then I was on a Twitter feed like recently, and some guy says, "I bet you these letter carriers don't know how much drugs they're dealing. We can't go out of business. I'd be out of business." And I said, "Oh, that kind of opened my eyes." Yeah, but a lot probably.
So, I mean, you're in the Boston area, so it's easy to make assumptions about somebody's politics based on kind of what part of the country they live, or even in this case, we know what part of the country you live in, and we know around actually, I don't know if people know what your income will be, but we know who you work for. We know what, so we can make assumptions and so on. But nonetheless, is it fair to ask you or any mail carrier what the typical politics of people that work in the post office are? Are they apolitical? Does politics come up because you're in Massachusetts? Is it a little bit more liberal? It's not always the case, by the way. People might not know
for
that.
Sure, yes, especially with white men. If you think all the white men in Massachusetts are liberal, you're out of your mind.
Yeah.
I work in the post office with a lot of white guys, and believe me, they're not liberal. They're conservative, and a couple of them definitely voted for Donald Trump and will probably do it again this election, even with their jobs on the line.
Interesting. Well, let me just ask you about them right now. I mean, how well do you know those guys? And being that the post office is in the news right now for all the reasons why I'm talking to you, that a lot of people know. I mean, do you talk to them? Do you ask them about that? Do you see what he's doing?
Yep, I talk to them all the time.
Do you have any recordings of those conversations you could share with me?
You wouldn't believe them if I told you the things that came out of their mouth.
Go ahead.
No, it's just like, like today we're at work and we're talking about, what's going on with the post office, like a lot of people are today. And one of the Trump supporters says, this stuff's been happening for a long time. This is nothing new. And I said to him, the president of the United States just said he was going to stop us so we can't deliver the ballots for an election. This is not something that happens every year or every election. This is something new. And, we can only go so far with the politics before we get upset at each other. But, yeah, they're more libertarian, the couple of guys in my office, than like hardcore conservatives, but they're definitely Trump voters.
What would you say to somebody who said the post office was a great and important agency, but it has outlived its usefulness? We don't need it anymore. We got FedEx, we got UPS, etc. What would you say if someone said that to someone like you?
All right. Well, I have a lot of answers for this one, but I would say they wouldn't understand what type of services we provide for the elderly, the type of services we provide for the rural parts of America. There are places we go that private for-profit company will never go. There are services we provide that can never be profitable, but yet we do it every day. So if you have a letter that you need to send somewhere across the country, you can do it with us for like 55 cents, right? Anybody has access to the post office, 55 cents. You try to do that letter through one of the private companies to get it over, get it there, you're talking like $10 or something. That takes that out of. Some people will not have access to mail that letter for $10.
Well, someone might say to you, and I'm just playing devil's advocate
Sure.
here, Joe. Who's mailing letters, Joe? I mean, what are we talking about here? Isn't it all just coupons and political flyers?
Well, I would say no. People are still there mailing letters. I see them every day. I mail registered letters, certified letters, things that they need hard copies for. Yes, they're still mailing letters, especially the elderly who don't have or people who don't have a lot of money and don't have access to Wi-Fi or computers or smartphones. There's still a demand for our service. But I think the most important thing about why I think this job is important, one, it connects all of America together. There's one agency that can really get to every door in America, and that's the Postal Service. People already have a distrust in the federal government, and I feel like the letter carriers are the friendly face of the federal government that are in your neighborhood every day, and people like us. And I think that's something. I really do. I think that's something.
I think it's a lot, and I love your passion about it as well. I think that's also something. Did you know that back in May, Joe, that the president, I'll never forget this, and I'm surprised we haven't heard more about this comment, but back in May of this year, the president called the U.S. Postal Service a joke.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Did you know that?
I do. Believe me, I pay attention to this kind of stuff, and I do remember it, and I figured he has had a problem with the Postal Service for a long time. And then with his feud with Bezos and he thinks that we're just delivering Amazon packages for free or something. That adds to it too. But yeah, it didn't feel very good when the president of the United States thinks that the company that you're very proud to work for is a joke.
What do you have to say about the Postmaster General? What do your colleagues at the post office think of this guy who seems to, like a lot of other people that the president appoints to run agencies, he seems to want to destroy the agency that he's running. He's invested in its competitors. What do you think about this fella?
I think it makes a lot of sense that someone's got hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe billions of dollars, takes a job as Postmaster General. I think that makes a lot of sense. There could be no underlying devious reason he took that job.
Yeah, that's true of Betsy DeVos. It's true of Wilbur Ross. It's true of several cabinet secretaries as well. That's a really good point. Yeah, why is he in that position? Have other Postmaster Generals been controversial? I don't even think I can name another one.
Right, nobody could ever really name another one. We're never in the spotlight like this before. Imagine, I can't believe that they're protesting outside of a Postmaster General's house. That is, usually you don't even know who the Postmaster General is. But yes, we've had like Postmaster Generals come along and they say, we're going to cut. And then, with the unions, we negotiate, and then Congress kind of gets involved, and, they go on their way, and the new guy comes in. They try to make some changes, and then they go take a better job or something.
So what's the mood right now for you and other folks? I mean, are you guys on – is there like online chats? Is the union keeping communication? I mean, what's morale like right now?
The morale is definitely at its lowest point since I've been there in 16 years. I remember during 2007, 2008, when we had the economic crash, and we were really worried because mail was drying up. They were making so many different cuts. They were trying to get people to retire early. And it really, it was pretty bad, and the morale was pretty bad. It doesn't compare to what people are feeling right now at the post office. We're understaffed. We got a pandemic going, so we're out there with masks on, delivering house to house, and then we have a president that is basically trying to assure that we fail. And it's just a really tough place to work right now. But I'll tell you what, when I go out and I see all the people, I see all the people supporting the Postal Service, the supporting the postal workers. We see them, we hear them, we love them. And that's why we go to work every day. And if we stick together, I think we'll come out the other side of this.
I love that attitude. I love that optimism. What's an experience that you could share with my listeners with somebody on your route that was a warm experience? How often do you have moments during your day or during your week where you really feel good and connected, just a happy moment? I mean, you probably talk to some people every day. You probably have become friends with people on the route.
Right. I have 3 elderly housing buildings on my route. And every day, not during the pandemic, but every day they would come down and they'd meet me at the mailbox, and I would flirt with the old ladies, and we would have so much fun while I was sorting the mail into the mailboxes. And it was just, it's just a good time. And one of the things I like, for example, like I'll go to one of the elderly housing places, and one of the women will say, "Joe, can you help me change my light bulb?" And I'll go into her apartment and I'll change a light bulb. One time, there was this man, and he was in the.
That sounds like the beginning of a porn, Joe. Joseph, would you come in here and take a look at my light bulb, please? And by light bulb, you know what I mean.
Some of them are pretty frisky, so I wouldn't put it past them.
That's awesome.
And then, like one time, I just remember. I remember walking away, kind of feeling moved. There was a man that met me in the room, the mail room, and he was trying to write out his checks for his bills, and his hand was shaking too much, and he couldn't write out the checks. And we had a good relationship, and he just said, "Joe, can you help me with these?" And I sat there with the guy and I wrote out 3 checks for him so he could pay his bills. And then I took those letters from him. And it's just stuff like that I don't think people understand the impact that we have in the neighborhoods. I mean, some people do, but most people just, they don't even think about the mailman. They just know the mail comes, they get their mail, and that's it. But we do, especially with the elderly, we do wellness checks. I don't know. I just feel we play a real big role in society. I'm very proud of where I work, and I could tell you 1,000 stories about the heroic things that some of my coworkers have done. It just makes me so mad that we're being used as a political tool.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing your experience with me. I sure do, Joe. I mean, it's really moving, and you did a great job sharing that experience with us. Anything I didn't ask you that you'd want to share with folks about your job and where it's at right now?
Yeah, I would just say, just support the post office. People out there are doing a great job right now. I think they're putting pressure on the president. They're putting pressure on the Republicans. They're putting pressure on the postmaster general. I can already see them backpedaling. Just keep doing. Let them know that you really appreciate our service. You don't want us going anywhere, and we promise that we'll do everything we can to keep providing the service that we do.
Thank you so much, Joe. Really great. Thanks for talking to me.
No problem, Pete. Thank you.
All right, that was Joe the Mailman. And if you want to get a message to him, you can email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com, put Joe the Mailman in the subject. It's always great when I get folks like Joe to join me in the conversation. Yesterday, I had longtime listener and supporter, my friend Jason Moe on, and folks loved that conversation and let me know. I forwarded those messages to Jason, and it made his day. So if you want to get a message to Joe, I'm sure he'd appreciate it. You can email it to me. That kind of little comment really does mean a lot to folks. Now I have my friend John Avlon, who it's been too long since I spoke to. I really should have John on the show every week, and I'm glad I've got him on this week, the week of the DNC beginning, the post office drama, and I start my conversation with John talking about the election in Belarus, which I know nothing about. I don't even know if that's how you pronounce it. Is it Belarus or Belarus? Anyway, John is on Twitter at John Avlon. He is the author of several books. He is a great historian. He's a former speechwriter. You can see him all the time on CNN, where he's an anchor and an analyst and host of the Reality Check segment, which is awesome. I think he's got one coming out today on CNN about the U.S. Post Office. Here's my conversation with John Avlon, and then Barry Ritholtz coming up, so stay tuned for that. Here's John and I. I am recording with John Avlon from the brand new studio, the Shedio. John joins me now at John Avlon on Twitter. I've already gave him the whole intro. Hey, buddy.
Hey, brother. I like the Shedio is a very good term. I like you should trademark that quick.
Oh, I'm sure I think I probably stole it from somebody else. Probably. Yeah, it was already there, but I'm taking it nonetheless. And I'm very happy to be talking to you from it because there's a bunch of things that I want to talk to you about. First of all, I wanted to ask you about Belarus. I don't know anything about that country or its election or why it's important, yet you're tweeting about it. And so I realized that I should probably care about it because you're tweeting about it. And whatever you tweet about, I generally care about. What do we need to know?
So this is a huge deal, what's going on in Belarus. So basically you have Europe's last dictator. It's a sort of former originally satellite state that was part of the broader Soviet Union PAC area. But unlike a lot of its neighbors, it's been a dictator as president since the mid-1990s. There has been a lot of popular pushback. A political opposition leader who was jailed, his wife ran in his stead. Huge intimidation factors by the government against them. Election day, massive turnout, and then the government turned around and said that magically he won, get this, 80.1% of the vote. And the people said the hell he did and took to the streets. They started arresting people. There were clashes with the cops and the riot police, but the protests have only grown. So this has set in motion two issues. One, the dictator Lukashenko is going to Vladimir Putin saying NATO's on the door, and there's real questions about what Putin will do. Will he intercede? Does he want this to be sort of a second Crimea? I think that's getting ahead of ourselves. But Putin has propped up dictators around the world. Why not one in his back door? At the same time, the U.S. has been stunningly silent. Over the weekend, I think there was a State Department tweet on the subject. The president was asked about it today, and he said it was a terrible situation. But none of the sort of full-throated defense of democracy that we have come to expect from the United States in the past. There's this they hit the mute button when anything seems to go on in this sphere of influence. So this is very much a watch this space if Putin gets directly involved, but also just to see the power of the people standing up to a dictator to try to steal an election. They called him out on it, and even at risk to themselves, they have been coming out in force, and they're continuing to do so. And what I'm so gratified by is that, in the first couple of days, I sort of said, you know what, I know it's an election in Belarus, but we're not paying sufficient attention in Western media, in American media. This morning on CNN on New Day, we had a dispatch from the protests. It was the top of the fold in the New York Times today. And it's that kind of sustained attention and pressure that needs to be put just so that dictators are on notice that no matter who's in power at any given time, that democracy is stronger than dictatorship. But that's something that people have to fight for, all of us.
In the past, would it be easy for you to say that any Republican or Democratic administration would have spoken strongly out in support for democracy in Belarus as opposed to this president? I mean, like sometimes presidents don't say things like countries like Saudi Arabia or China because of all the entangled interests, even though they should, on whether it be human rights violations or anything else. But in this case, you have all the confidence that George W. Bush, Barack Obama, anybody would have spoken out.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just, U.S. policy going back to the Velvet Revolutions of 1989 and 1990. We tend to support democracy movements, at least rhetorically. You're right. There's some countries where we muddle our message because of alliances or perceived, but during the Arab Spring, Obama famously didn't rally around Mubarak, even though he didn't wade in, and he tried to sort of sidestep in some cases like the Green Revolution in Iran, right, for fear of it being dismissed as sort of a U.S.-backed effort, right, wanting to let people own it. But that was clearly the disposition and instinct of administrations, plural, because that was American policy. We encourage democracy movements. We don't need to be naive about it. And it's significant in Belarus, and I was talking to Gary Kasparov about this, because apparently when the Soviet Union fell, Belarus was one of those regions and nation states that really sort of remained quiet. And so to see a popular uprising around this, and look at some of the videos online, the incredible courage and bravery of citizens standing up to riot police, standing up to police when their colleagues are put in vans, particularly. This is something that we need to pay attention to, and anything resembling science is permission. And we know this president has basically ceded Crimea to the Russians, and you can fault Obama and Cameron and other folks for not being strong enough, but there is a question about, at what point do you risk war? But at the very least, you encourage dissident movements, you encourage democracy. This is happening in real time. The administration has been largely silent, and we need to keep our eyes on them to support them, because in the contest between democracy and dictatorship, it's no contest. It's not a jump ball. We know what side we're on, or at least we should.
Well, one way to, I think, trend away from democracy and towards dictatorship is to get rid of the post office. I know you told me before we started you're going to do a fact check on CNN, a reality check on CNN about this tomorrow. I'm not sure from which angle, but, it would seem that we can do this. And by this, I mean we can have an election where we use almost exclusively, if not mostly, mail-in ballots, which are the same as absentee ballots. A number of states do it. They do it successfully. This country has activated itself to come together to overcome all kinds of adversity over our entire lifetime in this country. And the idea that we could not ramp up and create mail-in ballots for every eligible voter that wanted one is preposterous. So just starting there, this is not, I'm not saying it's easy, but it wouldn't be something that we couldn't do with the amount of time we have left. And the reason being, of course, that there's an active virus out there and people don't necessarily want to congregate.
This should not be a partisan issue. The president has been railing against mail-in balloting because he's decided that it will disadvantage him. In fact, there's plenty of evidence to suggest mail-in ballots benefit Republicans, in part because they tend to win older voters. Older voters are more likely to use mail-in ballots, particularly during a pandemic. They just won Kitty Hill's congressional seat in what was basically an all mail-in ballot special election in California. But he's got this idea. He's set up he's put forward a drumbeat. I've done a number of reality checks about this where Bill Barr backs him up, baselessly suggesting that mailing voting leads to fraud, then says, well, I haven't looked into it. If you know anything about mail-in balloting, and it happens basically 100% of the time in 5 states. It happened overwhelmingly last time. I think 25% of all ballots in 2016 were mail-in, and the distinction between mail-in and absentee is basically de minimis. But the president's been railing against it in tweets and speeches, and he has a new, postmaster general who's basically just a Trump mega donor who's come in, and the first thing he did out of the gate was take under a number of reforms, quote unquote, that basically slowed the roll of the post office from, delaying deliveries. To getting rid of these massive mail sorting machines, which they had been doing, and CNN obtained a list of the planned closures of these machines to basically saying there's no more overtime. Look, the post office is in deep financial trouble. It dates to a really dumb 2006 law that basically said they had to fully fund their pension obligations for 50 years out, which no company or business or government entity can afford to do. It's really an attempt to kneecap it. But now it's been put on accelerate in front of election, and the president gave up the ghost. He said the quiet part out loud again, saying they want all this money. They're not going to get this money. And if they don't get this money, they're not going to be able to do universal mail-in voting. So he said it, what the whole freaking deal is. And, good people can disagree, and I'm sure there are rooms for efficiencies in the post office, but what there cannot be, and what you really need to do is get rid of this 2006 law. But the fact that the president's saying that we're going to hold money hostage to the post office so that we see that there's not universal mail-in voting, when not only has he demonized it totally baselessly, I mean, the number of fraudulent mail-in ballots are non-existent. Go look at, in Oregon, I did a reality check about this a few weeks ago. It's like 0.000025% in the last 20 years.
It would have to be a massive operation undertaken by a number of people to aggregate, to collect enough, fraudulent, phony ballots to affect the outcome of an election. And it wouldn't be worth it to commit such a crime.
Not only that, look, let's be clear about what's happening. I mean, in many of these states, if not most, there's a barcode that gets sent to every individual. So you can't replicate or duplicate ballots. So right there, the whole idea that it's going to inherently cause chaos belies experience and the expertise that's been put in place. This is about a systemic effort the president has continued to make to try to undermine confidence in the results of our elections. I mean, just tonight, he said the only way we can lose is if it's rigged. And he is laying a narrative groundwork among his supporters to say that, that the election's rigged, that he can't possibly lose, and that is the president of the United States undermining faith in our democratic institutions. That is as big and serious as it gets, and that's why this is such a big deal.
Right? Yeah, and he's done this before. I mean, he always sets the scene so that he can create a narrative for either outcome, right? And then jump on it after the event is over, whether it be you name it. I mean, his show, The Apprentice. This is what he does, and I think the best example is the Mueller investigation. He called it a hoax. Even though we knew nothing about what the investigation was happening, there were no leaks. He just called it a hoax over and over and over. And then when it was completed, he just said, "See, it's a hoax." And it didn't matter what.
And of course, it wasn't, and it wasn't an exoneration. But this is about repetition, and his hardcore supporters. it becomes part of the narrative, and he knows this. But this is our democracy, and don't get lulled on this one. I mean, the post office sent out a letter basically saying 46 states that if you hand in your ballot late, it may not get counted. And there are two ways to respond to that. First of all, Nancy Pelosi is trying to bring Congress back from the summer recess, which she should, to make sure this doesn't happen. They should not only do a Band-Aid funding deal, they should get rid of this 2006 law because it's basically a man-made problem. There's some other issues, obviously, with the internet and email and all that. But but then, folks should be determined to vote, and they should vote early. And whenever possible, just to ensure their thing is counted. This is not an election where you need to make up your mind at the last moment for the vast majority of people.
Right. So, what do you think of the DNC starts this week, and it's all virtual, and so it's you and I have been to these things many times.
Mm-hmm.
They can be.
I know. Normally, we'd be hanging out at the CNN Grill right about now.
Exactly, and they're exciting, and they're fun for a lot of different reasons. You meet people, you get energized if you're part of the. The DNC or the RNC. What is this thing that is happening this week? It's just a bunch of people talking on Zoom. I mean, it's like when he came out and introduced Kamala last week, and there was no audience or anything. It was just so deflated. I mean, it was, it really didn't hit the mark in a way that it should have.
It's less than our expectations, but I wonder how many people actually notice that. I mean, our expectations are set. Obviously, people have energy in a room. But, in this case, I mean, before tonight, they released excerpts of Michelle Obama's speech, which was pre-taped. And you know what? It was a really powerful, heartfelt testimonial. It'll be interesting to see how much the event, the night is produced. That'll be one of the really fascinating things because, as in everything with 2020, there's not a precedent for this presidential election.
Yeah.
But it begins. You're getting Senator Klobuchar and Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan, and Jim Clyburn and John Kasich, a Republican, former governor who's been railing against Trump. And I think a number of Republicans are going to start coming out and opposing Trump. Bernie Sanders and Michelle Obama. It's a strong first night, and then on Wednesday night you're going to have Kamala Harris and President Obama, and then Thursday night it's Biden, and every night there are a number of speakers, and it's a good diverse list. They've got musical guests and all that stuff. It's going to be hard to compare it to past conventions. We'll see what the attention level is. We'll see what the excitement is, but I do think if you look, I mean, for months and months and months, the enthusiasm around this election has been at like October levels, and even the normal divisions you see inside the Democratic Party have been papered over because there really is a sense of mission in this election.
Going to be hard to compete with the RNC.
Trump supporters are just as intense.
It's going to be hard to compete with the RNC's lineup. I think he's got Sheriff Joe Arpaio, Dinesh D'Souza, and Ted Nugent.
Well, I mean, right there, you sold me.
I just made that line up, and you had to pause for a second. You're like, does he? Is that what he's doing?
I mean, that's entirely possible. There's no reason to think that those people will not be involved in some way.
I also have. I'm going to introduce you to my next speaker. Is Magneto and the Penguin are also coming out here in moments.
No, but it'll be really. I mean, he just announced today he's going to give a speech from the White House, which last time I checked was illegal, but apparently they're going to just blur that line entirely because he got a legal opinion saying it'd be okay, which you can get a legal opinion for almost anything. But they had originally Charlotte, then they tried to move to Jacksonville, then there was a concession to reality because of the debacle of Tulsa. But look, nobody should doubt, Trump supporters, as you and I've talked about, are really, really passionate. Now, the number I've always focused on before COVID and the economy and everything is Trump's strong support number. It's like 25 to 33%. His strong opposed number has been around 50 to 53. So that's an almost 2-to-1 ratio, depending when you look at it. But nobody should doubt the intensity of Trump supporters is quite something. And then, we got to all keep our eyes because we had foreign interference last time and influence. Right. And this is going to be the kind of thing where we all just got to be eagle-eyed to make sure we have a free and fair election. And they're not attempts to suppress votes and put fingers on the scale, which the president constantly talks about. And I think we all need to understand that this election, we should not enter election day with the assumption, because of the number of mail-in votes, that it's going to be, we're going to know who won on election night or the next day. I think it's going to be an election week, and it's going to be a very critical moment for our country.
I'm going to sleep.
It's a complete blowout.
I'm going to sleep through that week.
You're just gonna medicate yourself.
I'm gonna get some kind of a cryo chamber or something. If take a pill, I just sleep through that week. I
just
can't
try to climb out of the tube you've been living in, and come out and what happened?
Yeah, just like
where
some
is everybody?
Rub my eyes. Are we still here? Before I let you go, what do you we haven't talked for a little while, and that upsets me. But what
makes me sad?
What would you say is a kind of a comprehensive commentary on the Trump administration's handling of this pandemic?
Of the what?
The pandemic. The COVID.
Oh, yeah, that. Yeah, I mean, look, this is also something that shouldn't be partisan. As Mitt Romney pointed out the other day, the U.S. has 5% of the world's population and 25% of the cases or deaths outpace any other nation. There's no way to spin that as a good thing. I just didn't. This is obviously an unprecedented challenge for the world, but we have examples of how different countries have handled it, and we have not handled it well. And it's in large part because of the president's denial from the early days. Virus started in China. There's a lot, we can learn from this, but we have failed to contain it, and and we're making progress. Things are not in a good place. Remember, the summer was supposed to take care of itself. It's been galloping in different parts of the country, in different regions, and sometimes it flatlines. And the fall, where the CDC directors warned us could be really terrible, is still ahead of us. But there has been a failure to lead in a public health crisis that I think has made the costs of this president's often fact-free style really, really apparent, because America should be the leader in these types of things. We should be helping other countries. And I think this is a sobering realization about why we need government, why we need competent government, why we need to listen to science, and why we need leadership that believes in those things.
John Avlon, so happy when I get to talk to you. Watch him on CNN.
Always, my friend. Good to hear your voice.
And I will talk to you soon again, I hope. Thank you, buddy.
Let's do it.
All right.
All right.
And there goes John Avlon. I don't know what was going on with his phone. I think he must have been getting voicemail messages or something. Did you hear that vibrating? Maybe you didn't hear it. It wasn't the perfect connection, but it's always a great conversation with John Avlon. I always learn a lot. Did you hear that President Trump called out our friend Ali Velshi? Bastard. Yeah, he didn't pronounce his name right, and he said he worked at CNN yesterday. Anyway, Velshi took it in stride. Go check out his Twitter timeline. Okay, now joining me is our headliner, because he was generous enough to give me, as he usually does, about an hour of his time. Good friend of mine. Love him. Love reading his daily reads every day. You should sign up for them. You should check out his blog, The Big Picture. His podcast is a real hit, Masters in Business, which he does every week. And he tweets at Ritholtz. He's great on Twitter. My friend, Barry Ritholtz. We start right here in the middle of the conversation, as I often do with my guests. And we're talking about time and whether or not time means anything, or if it's just a human construct. Here it is, Ritholtz.
Doesn't really exist.
Where does the time go?
It doesn't go anywhere. We just experience its passing relative to the various relative positions of celestial bodies, the Earth around the sun, the moon, etc.
Huh. Never really thought about it that way.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Do you feel
actually, it turns out there is no such thing as time objectively. Time is a human construct.
Do you feel like some days are a lot longer than other days, or do you feel like time goes by faster in quarantine?
When I'm really busy on stuff, time flies by.
Yeah.
Especially if it's something I'm interested in.
When are you not really busy and really interested in something?
1 to 3, my least productive time every day.
Do you ever take a nap?
Yes.
You do?
But only when I come back from the beach. I go in the hammock and I crash.
Bruce Bartlett said he takes a nap every day because it makes it feel like you have 2 full days worth of energy.
Can I tell you something?
And that makes so much sense to me. And I keep
working at home,
it.
I am down with that. I would like to. So my favorite show on TV is this really wonky science show called How the Universe Works.
Huh.
And
it's on TV. What's TV these days? Where is that available?
By the way, I'm gonna set my sound so that this comes through the mic instead of you.
It sounds great. You sound great.
Oh, really? How does it? Well, I was hearing you through the speakers instead of through the headphones. So
how it sounds to you is different.
Right. I didn't want you
Is
to
it
get
pouring where you are in Long Island?
No, it's gorgeous.
Pouring here. It's been pouring on and off all day. It's
no, that was
Florida.
yesterday. Yesterday it poured.
Yeah, it's nice to be in the new Shedio and have the rain like this on both sides.
So How the Universe Works, the show works on 2 levels. It's on the science fiction channel, even though it's science fact. When you're awake and watching the show, it's kind of a fascinating exploration of things like neutron stars and black holes and where the universe ends and how the Big Bang started. And I mean, they have a bunch of very articulate astrophysicists and others discussing
Science
this.
Channel. It's on the Science Channel, not the Science.
Is it?
ScienceChannel.com. How the Universe Works. Go ahead.
So, and the graphics and animation are just beautiful. You know, you see like exploding stars, and it's lovely. So if you're awake and watching it, and you're interested in that sort of stuff, it's fascinating. But if you ever get up in the middle of the night and just can't get back to sleep, at 1 a.m, space just lulls you into a coma. It's my go-to. Oh, I'm up at 1 a.m. What do I do? I put on Alien Stars and just fall asleep.
Well, aren't you sharing a bed with your wife? And that's what I love, not sharing a bed with my wife. And I don't understand how those of you. My wife and I don't sleep in the same bed almost never, because it makes no sense. No, not even the same room. It makes no sense to be in the same room as another person.
Really?
Oh, it's so much better. Once you get over all of society's...
So those old 50s sitcoms with 2 separate beds was a good idea. Is that
Absolutely. You have your own space. You wake up and go to bed when you want. You control every variable from the temperature. And if you can't sleep like that and you wake up and you want to watch something, you don't have to worry about waking the other person up.
I just keep it low.
What do you do? Have headphones on and look at your phone or something?
No, I just put on the TV and put it on low.
You put on a TV in the bedroom while your wife is sleeping and on low volume.
And vice versa. She will do the same.
Insane sounding.
The volume is on 8.
It doesn't matter what if I did that.
Out of 100.
If I did that, my wife would chop my throat.
Really?
Oh, yeah. For sure. She would be like, what are you doing? No. She will wake right up and not go back to sleep.
So you have different bedrooms.
Yes.
Wow.
I sleep in a trundle bed, and I love it.
Say you can sneak guests in late at night.
I could if I wanted. Anybody,
while your wife is sleeping.
If anybody were interested in coming over, yes, I could do that.
Yeah, I think separate beds and separate bedrooms. You might as well have separate apartments at that point.
Well, it works so good for us. My wife is her sleep is like vitally important to her. Even when
is she a light sleeper?
Yeah, very light.
Oh, well, that, I could see that.
So you have a recent post at Ritholtz.com, the big picture, how externalities affect systems. I thought we could talk about that. What is an externality? This is a pretty fascinating piece.
So speaking of space, an externality is when you have a system that normally operates with a certain amount of inputs and outputs and certain processes, et cetera, et cetera. When something comes from outside that normal system, and interrupts it or in some way affects it dramatically, that's an externality. And the examples I use, the system is the stock market, and externalities were things like the assassination of Duke Ferdinand that began World War I.
1940, that was 1914. 1941, right. Pearl Harbor, bringing U.S. into World War II. 63, assassination of JFK. 2001, September 11th attacks.
Right.
2011, the earthquake and tsunami and full system failure at the nuclear plant in Japan.
Yeah, Fukushima.
And then the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic leading to global lockdown.
So I think you and I briefly talked about this, and we didn't really discuss it on a prior podcast. I wrote a piece in the last week of March and published it on April 1st, which always gives people the opportunity to write, this is an April Fool's joke, isn't it? That said, hey, what happens if the bull market isn't over? What happens if the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown is an externality that just temporarily shuts everything down? And then as we begin to get past it, the market and the economy begin to recover and things go back to normal. And a million people, push back at that. There's this weird myth that down 20% is a bear market. Whenever anybody throws it at me, I always say, oh, what's your basis for saying down 20%? Well, that's what everybody says is really a terrible answer. So when you look at history and you look at the long secular markets, think about the whole post-World War II period. You have tens of millions of GIs returning home. The GI Bill sends them to college. The interstate highway system allowed goods and people to move around the country much more quickly. The rise of civil aviation, the build out of suburbia, and the rise of car culture. All these things happen at once. Plus the baby boom after World War II, all these things happen at once, that you have a 20-year cycle of economic growth and gains. And, it takes a lot to derail that sort of massive economic expansion. And the assumption that Sputnik or the Cuban Missile Crisis or the assassination of JFK is going to end that is always off base. People don't realize how massive the economy is. The economy is simply how we go about surviving every day, how we get food, how we get shelter, how we take care of our kids, how we do. That's what the economy is. And it's much harder to derail that than you would imagine.
Well, all that being said, it would seem that just going back to two things you said, how much harder it is to derail that and how when things get back to normal, what is your understanding as to what the kind of the curvature for measuring all of normality, including our financial system, is? Because I don't see, and I'm the most optimistic guy, I don't see normal. I see what is happening and all these great think pieces being written about it by the way, about just a massive types of disruption, and we never go back to anything remotely close to what was normal. And we can unpack that good and bad. But what do you think normal is?
All
and
right,
when do you think it is?
I'm going to share one thing with you, and I'll talk about what normal is, and then, oops, that's the wrong thing. Ignore that. You pay attention to that. So a couple of weeks ago, I wrote a post called Off the Charts. And I basically took a look at half a dozen or so economic charts. And the numbers were just so off the scale that you couldn't use your normal charts to measure them. You had to rejigger the scale. You had to take the y-axis and make it so much bigger than it was, because the numbers are just simply insane, just completely insane. So first, we are not in a normal economy. Anytime you say to half the country, right, half the workers in the country, by the way, you're furloughed, you're not working.
Right.
Could be 3 months, could be 6 months, could be a year, we don't know, but stay at home. That's not the normal economy. It turns out about half of the employees out there, maybe a little more, are fortunate enough to be able to work remotely. And so when you cut the GDP in half, when you cut the economy in half, that's an unusual situation. I think people are really misunderstanding what the net result of this is going to be. Because I think we might have talked about this once before, but I'll bring it up. I'm on a Zoom call with like 12 people, all sorts of ages, mostly professionals, economists, strategists, researchers. And they're all talking about this, how fantastic this new technology is. Zoom calls and all these different things. And I had to point out, hey, you guys understand this technology is about 12 years old, right? Ever since the first iPhone had FaceTime on it, doing those sort of calls are easy. And then Google Hangouts and screen shares, and none of the technology you're talking about is especially new. It might be new to you, and it might be more widespread, but all this tech has been around for a long time. Computers have had self-facing cameras for years, not a coincidence. Why do you think that is? That's so people can do video calls, and it's been available on phones for a long time. Google Hangouts have been around forever. It's just the sort of thing that is very typical when we have this big disruption. People seem to think all these new things are happening. What you're really seeing is prior trends are accelerating. So things that were already happening, were people leaving cities? Yeah, about 1% of urban population leaves every year. But they're replaced by new people coming in because cities have been the dominant socioeconomic model for 5 centuries. It's where all of our cultural and artistic energy comes from. It's from where all of our business innovation, or most of it, seems to come from. The city-state has been around as a key driver for centuries because we're social animals and we like to get together and share ideas and share concepts. So all the talk of like the death of cities, color me skeptical.
Well, okay, but what you're saying is that things have, and I've heard you and others say this before, that were already happening have just sped up. But that doesn't necessarily point to what the future holds for whatever we describe as normal. In this piece, you write, in each of these cases in the past when externalities hit, markets would wobble. Often they would create a spike in fear that led to a sell-off fast and hard. That's how I like my sell-offs, by the way, Ritholtz. But then the markets would normalize and simply resume to their prior trend. Now, you seem to continue to predict that we're going to return to prior trends and some sense of normality, unless I'm reading or hearing you wrong, as opposed to a lot of other people who are preparing for an imminent collapse of society. Have you read these collapse of society think pieces? There's some pretty good ones.
Yeah, for as long as I've been involved in markets, the apocalypse has been coming. By the way, that's been a money-losing bet since humanity first started walking upright. It's... but
doesn't that doomsday clock keep ticking a lot close? Does it ever not? Nothing seems to shake your belief here?
I had no electricity for 10 days.
Yeah, I want to talk about
that storm. That pissed me off. That says, gee, can we not really have a and I'll tell you something else that's deeply concerning. The inability of the media to deal with just a relentless parade of myths and misinformation,
right,
is deeply concerning. Yeah. Although you could go back and look at quotes 2 centuries ago. A lie is halfway around the world while the truth is still lacing up its boots. So this sort of crap has been going on
but
forever.
it goes faster and it's and more pernicious now. I refuse to argue about that.
I don't know.
Come on,
I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know? A lie can travel far and fast through word of mouth. That's how it used to travel. Now, I can tweet something.
The faster part I'm not arguing about. It's the pernicious part.
That it's more. I'm
popping my peas.
There's an argument to be had there, which is more damaging or dangerous. But I don't know. The deep state and Democrats running a pedophile ring seems to be pretty damaging.
There's a scene in
30% of Americans believe that.
Have you ever seen the movie Moonstruck?
I don't remember it.
Cher.
Nicolas Cage and Cher. There's a scene where Cher just holds off and slaps Nicolas Cage across the face. Snap out of it, she yells at him. I want to just reach through the computer and just, do snap out of it.
I hear you.
All these people who are just, and it, to me, the whole idea of information theory and how people process data and all the cognitive biases, like I'm going to be surprised if we don't find out in a couple of years that QAnon was a Russian agitprop sort of thing. We're going to find out that, or some player like that, because it's just a perfect setup and it just keeps going along. And look, I don't know how to say this politely. People are easily fooled and misled and will follow charismatic or some types of leaders right off a cliff. And there's just too many examples of people literally drinking the Kool-Aid. Everybody uses the word literally wrong. Literally taking a poison cup of Kool-Aid and ending their lives because they're following somebody who's a high functioning, lunatic. And that is human nature. People behave that way. Look, the day Nixon waved goodbye and got on Marine One and flew away, his approval rating was 30%. So that means that there is, about a third of the electorate that says, I don't care, my guy, as bad as he is better than their idiot.
Right.
That's human nature.
What about what is happening right now with Congress? How closely do you watch whether or not they're going to renew financial aid to Americans, all types of financial aid?
I pay attention to it. I mean, didn't they just break on recess? I know that. So supposedly, so you have.
Although the House is getting back together
convention this week, you have the Republican convention next week. Nancy Pelosi can call whoever she wants back. If Mitch McConnell doesn't bother, well, then what are you going to do? It's obviously was not a priority to many elected officials.
When you look at the economics of it, how important is that money to the entire economy? And at what point does the government run out of money?
Government never runs out of money. What the value of that money is up for debate. But as long as you have your own printing presses and a standing army, the U.S. government can never run out of money.
It's not what Peter Schiff says.
Okay, so between me and him, who are you going to believe?
Always you. But he's been on Joe Rogan, and you have not.
This is listen. He's a big hard metal guy, and he's a anti-government libertarian, and his beliefs shape the facts he chooses to look at. I try and be more objective. And listen, I have biases like everybody else. I try to be a little more aware of them than the hardcore ideologues who everything has to be viewed through their own perspective. So through their own ideology. Listen, the example people give, we'll turn into the Weimar Republic. Well, you have one or two examples of
where the money is not worth anything.
Right, but wheelbarrow to go buy a quart of milk, wheelbarrow of cash. But most other countries, that doesn't happen to. And even the countries that eventually are replaced by other countries, it's still a relatively okay process. It's sort of rare that you have that. And that was, speaking of externalities, that was a very specific set of facts that led to that occurring and eventually led to a world war.
So I want to ask you about how concerned you are. I know you're watching the post office closely, this story as well. And
kind of shocking.
Obviously the politics of it, but how do you handle the argument from your expertise and point of view that the post office is inefficient, and as is everything that is government run is often the argument. But we have all these private delivery companies, and then you've got Amazon.
Use the post office to do the last mile because it's inefficient for them. Look, the post office is in the Constitution. It's mandated.
But I don't care about that, and I'm trying to be consistent. I try to be consistent. There's a lot of things in the Constitution that aren't necessarily great or don't make that much sense or outdated.
The post office is a service. We want to be able to deliver mail and products and other things to every person in America, and the fact that there may be 10% of the country or 20%, I don't know what the number is, that live remotely in places like parts of Alaska or if you look at the Midwest or the far West, lots of that area is big empty space. There is a value to having every American being reachable by post. And, the idea of running the post office like a business, we have businesses that run parcel delivery like a business. This is a government service, just the way schools are, just the way libraries are, just the way police and fire departments are. You don't run these things at a for-profit comparison. You basically say, can we move mail around productively and efficiently? Can we do this? Can we get all the things that people need to get in the mail to every American? And there are countries that don't have that commitment, where, hey, we're going to abandon some percentage of our population because it's expensive to make sure they can get mail. America, at least pre-2020, didn't do that. America said, if you're an American, you can get mail. Any American can send a piece of mail to any other. Everybody can do their taxes by mail. Every American can vote by mail. That's how we were before President Hate to Lose decided to sabotage the now there's a simple solution. You put on a mask or two and you put on a face shield and you go vote in person. And if you're concerned about voting on election day, well, look up your local voter registration. 40 states have early voting, anywhere from 3 days to 3 weeks, that you could go cast a vote when it's probably going to be pretty empty, and just make sure you vote. And I posted about that yesterday. And I was kind of surprised. I got no pushback. Usually there's always some idiot that says, I read you for economics, not for voter advice. It's like, well, skip that article. Read the next one. What do you want from me, man? It's my platform. You don't like it? Don't read it. Read the next one.
I've always loved how you just simply dismiss the haters. You don't spend a lot of time arguing with people on Twitter, do you?
I've kind of learned to not do that. Look, the history of broadcast used to be one to many, right? You would write an article and it would go in the paper or a magazine, and it would be read by hundreds of thousands or millions of people, and some tiny percentage of them would write angry letters to the editor, and every now and then one of those letters would end up on the letters to the editor section that nobody read except the cranks who had sent in their letters previously. But the idea that anybody, I've had this conversation with people who are much better known than me and much smarter than me and much wealthier than me about not punching down and not getting into the mud. And every now and then someone will do something and I just want to lop their head off. And I had somebody do that the other day, but I take I will admit to taking a perverse joy in blocking people who I think are assholes. If you're just misinformed, if you're just, this guy is just kind of clueless but harmless, those guys I mute. But if you're like a full-on raging hemorrhoid, I'm very happy to block you. And I do it in a way that you don't even see. It's fantastic.
So let me go back, though, to the government bailouts or government. We shouldn't call them bailouts, should we? You are the author of Bailout Nation. But what do you think is important and necessary? We're hearing a lot about $600 versus $400 versus $200. When you look at the typical argument that you hear on economics, a lot of times on the right, they say we can't pay people not to work; it's a handout, and they're just going to sit around and do nothing. They have to be motivated to work, and giving them a handout won't motivate them to work. You hear that kind of argument, despite what kind of economy we're in, good or bad. But that again is the argument that you're hearing now, which is why one of the sticking points for Republicans not approving of the $600 again, although it really did seem to work. Like it seemed like actually that worked and made a big difference, and it didn't crush the economy as much as we thought it might at that point. But now it seems like it's going to. I mean, I'm reading terrible stories about people running out of money and being evicted and running out of food, and they're everywhere.
So let's break this down. Let's unpack that in a few things. First, there's no doubt the $1,200 check and then the $600 continuing unemployment check, that money found its way into the economy. And the reason we know that's the case is retail sales were up, a couple of percent. It was shocking. Retail sales today are higher than where the lockdown started. That's pretty amazing considering so many people are stuck at home. So that's number one. Number two, under normal circumstances, I would say that if you pay people more than the average wage, you will discourage them from going back to work. The problem that you run into is that, many of the people who are on unemployment, those jobs are gone. So have you been into Manhattan since the lockdown started? I have not, but my guys who've gone into the office and other people who I've spoken to tell me it's block after block after block of plywood boarded up windows. It's become just a retail debacle. So you have those people, those jobs aren't there for them. Look at all the restaurants and the bars. Most restaurants and bars are having a really hard time. The best estimates, the most optimistic estimates, are a third of those are gone. And it might be as many as half of all bars and restaurants are not going to survive this. Yeah. So these are two of the biggest hit areas in that space. If you work in that space, what job are you going to get? What are you going to do? Now, there are some gig jobs you can pick up, delivering supermarket stuff that most people weren't using. What about all the Uber drivers? No, who's taking an Uber these days? It's ground to a halt. You go sector of the economy after the sector. If you're an airline pilot, stewardess, steward, mechanic, technician, the guys that, wave the orange things in, airline is off 87%. It's almost, so where are these people who are getting $600, which maybe is more, where are they going to get a job? Like if people are complaining that I can't get my employees to come in, well, either they've gotten another job or maybe, just maybe, they don't want to get a disease and die or kill other people in their family who might be at risk. That's a pretty big issue to say, I don't have confidence that you're going to follow the rules, keep your clients safe, keep me safe, and keep my family safe. So that becomes a really, it's an aspect of it. So under normal circumstances, overpaying people on unemployment probably discourages them from going back to work. These don't really seem to be especially normal circumstances if those jobs are unavailable. Let me point out that the economy has improved to the point where the unemployment rate is still worse than the worst it was during the great financial crisis. We've improved to the point where still worse than 08-09 at its very worst. That's pretty astonishing to me.
We're still worse than it was in right now.
Right today is worse unemployment, worse job loss than the peak of 08-09.
And what does
That's how much better it is. We're still terrible.
And how much does it matter how sustained that is? Because everybody talks about a V-shape versus a U-shape recovery. Like if it's sustained, that unemployment, it's really brutal. If it bounces back quicker, there's not as much suffering. Because
I don't know if I keep sending you charts and stuff while we're talking.
Where are you sending them? An email?
I'm just texting them to you.
Oh.
So I texted you off the charts, and I texted you the unemployment data, and V-shaped recovery. I don't think it's going to be as long to recover as the post-Great Financial Crisis. That was a structural issue that had to be resolved over long periods of time as the real estate sector improved, and a lot of things had to slowly go right. The really, really bad parts of the economy took 4, 5, 6 years to heal. So if you told me tomorrow we have a vaccine and we have a treatment for people who get this, and I think it would be, 18 months. It's a process to kind of get everybody back in place. But it wouldn't be anything like 3, 4, 5, 6 years. If we're lucky, it's 6 months. 12 to 18 months is probably
But why do
more
you think that?
reasonable.
I just don't understand why you think that like the circumstances like a vaccine are going to make that much of a difference. Even if you have an effective vaccine, like half of Americans aren't even going to take it.
Yeah, so I don't believe that number one, and I'll tell you why. Every school district in America is going to send a letter home. Hey, shit for brains. Vaccinate your fucking idiot kids or keep them home for the rest of your lives. Sign the school district, go fuck yourselves. And that'll be that letter, right? I mean, stop and think about it.
Well, I don't know.
Offices are going to tell their patients, hey, if you don't get your little shit vaccinated, you're no longer my patient. Go find another doctor. There's a witch doctor in the next town. He'll do a dance and sprinkle some urine on you, and you'll be off on your way. I don't buy. Like, I've seen numbers 25, 35%. I don't buy that. And as I know, a lot of people are dumb. I know a lot of people think the Earth is flat and that vaccines cause autism, and I understand all of that. But I would be shocked. I would be. And by the way, local parents, if you have a friend or a neighbor that doesn't want to get a COVID, you tell your kids you can't play with little Johnny because his mother is a shithead moron and you're banned.
We had that
playing
scenario. I've talked about it on the podcast.
Yeah, and
my daughter's friends' family are anti-vaxxers and not.
All right, see ya.
Yeah,
hey,
they don't. They.
I would shame them on Facebook and be done with it.
I shamed them on the podcast without naming them, and the lady.
You name.
Lady got very mad at me. She said, "What will our community think of me?" And I was like, "What do you mean?
They'll think you're a fucking idiot."
Well, I told her
because you're a fucking idiot.
I go, listen. I was the last person to find this out about you. Everybody else already knew. They already think this about you.
They don't think anything. They know you're a moron. And worse than the fact that you're a moron, you're entitled to be a moron. You're dangerous to me, my family, my kids, everybody else. That's the problem. The fact that you're an idiot, well, that's your choice. The fact that you're a danger to people around you, that's not your choice.
Do you think now, as school begins to start up or not start up,
starts up for a few days and then shuts?
It really does. UNC just moved all classes online because 130 students at University of North Carolina, I think Chapel Hill.
Who could have seen that coming?
So that's going to happen at every college and every school in the country.
Certainly a possibility.
I mean, but. How do you see that from your standpoint about what that means for the economy? Because the ripple effect, of course, is that parents, especially parents with young children, can't go to work and can't produce whatever they do.
That's the penalty for being a member of a society filled with idiots.
I understand that, but how does that affect the economy if we don't go back to school? I mean, is that a thing that you look at that you're deeply concerned about?
Yeah, no, it's a real problem. It's a real problem that there is a huge chunk of people who will be unable to do their normal jobs because their local school district is unable to either open or stay open. That's a big deal. That's a really big deal. So I don't know. I mean, what will end up happening is one parent will end up being stuck at home. We'll go back to, in a lot of places, to one, unless both parents can work remotely. And if that's the case, well, then maybe they'll just have to take turns with childcare and child education. But it's definitely a problem. There's no doubt about that.
What do you think about what this disruption has done? We may have talked about this before, but I'm continuously fascinated by this, especially now that I have this, studio that I literally built in my shed in my yard. I'm so excited about working from here. Right now, the sun is shining in on me. It's just rained. It's really just a beautiful place to be and to be doing my work. And I was reading, you read these articles, you read these statistics about how many commercial offices in Midtown Manhattan or any, especially in New York, but in other cities as well, are empty. and that companies are finding out that that's fine, that they don't need people to come to work. And I've actually made this argument for years. Well, I know nothing about how any office works, but you could save a lot of money on your employees, on your office rental. I mean, from your standpoint, you have a beautiful office in Midtown Manhattan. Nobody's gone into it for what, months?
No, we have people in the office. People have been going in the office since we reopened in beginning of July.
Okay, well,
but it's 3 or 4 people, not 20 people that are usually there.
And now I remember we talked about this before, because you talked about these hybrid models where 2 people would go in on Monday, right. 2 people go in on Tuesday, but then you could all share the same office space. You could save money on your company could on rent. How much do you see this being a disruption in changing the way that we work permanently, which affects, by the way that we commute, which affects how we buy cars and the price of fuel, et cetera?
So let me give you an answer that hopefully you won't be too unhappy with. So that process began about 40 years ago when we began outsourcing jobs to China, to India, to elsewhere, when we began a global labor arbitrage, the process of different economic sectors impacting local real estate began. And now, think about this. It started with electronics and other goods made in Japan. It then moved on to automobiles, where a lot of pieces are outsourced, then technology, more and more pieces. But where things really began to change was when service industries began to get outsourced. First, it was the phone center, then it was the helpline, and then eventually very low-level legal work and accounting work was outsourced to high education, low salary regions like India. A lot of America's legal work and accounting work, the grunt stuff, not the client interfacing, is done overseas because it's cheaper. And that's very low key. People don't advertise it. They want to assume that their local person is a local expert, but you don't have to be a local to be an expert. As long as you have access to the laws, the books, you can do that. So now here's the question that comes up. You're running a law firm or an accounting firm or some service business in New York, and then you are actually working on a remote basis, and you discover that your high-end, expensive patent lawyers that have to be in New York or Boston or wherever the business is, they have to come into the office. But their assistants and the administrative and clerical staff who are also working remote, they don't have to be in the office. And so if they don't have to be in the office, why do they need to be a local New Yorker or a local Bostonian where the rent and the salaries are expensive? Why not outsource that to South Carolina or Iowa or someplace where the cost of labor is cheaper, and the real estate and everything else is proportionately cheaper? So there is no doubt that is happening. When you look at a lot of the service models, like things like logo designs, I'm trying to remember the company 99 Logos, something like that, where you put it out to bid, you have no idea where these people are, and it's really inexpensive, and they do nice work. So the process of service businesses leaving the city, I mean, that's been happening for a long, long time, and it's going to continue happening. So what's the flip side of this? Okay, so clearly we were thinking about, we add 3 or 4 more people. Maybe we add another floor. From my perspective, I don't need to add another floor. And I always pay my rent on time. And, I'm ready to go to my landlord and say, hey, we'll re-up for 10 years. Give us a discount. And we're happy to sign a 10-year lease. But here's the flip side of this. What do people hate about working from home? What do they hate? They hate the lack of social interaction. Fucking Zoom calls. Really? Who wants to do another Zoom call? I get email invites to Zoom calls all the time, and it's like, dear Lord, do I really need to be literally tied to my computer?
Can I just say, I wonder if I'm normal or average or somewhere on the peripheral, but I love being around people. I definitely missed that interaction.
You just did a stand-up gig, didn't you?
Yeah.
How was that?
It was great. It was great.
Do you miss that?
But you know what I hated on the way up to it? That I had to drive 2.5 hours. And my point is,
that's a long haul.
Well, my point is though, I drove
locally.
I think it is a variable that includes your commute, because yes, I love being around people. I love interacting with people. I like the idea of meeting new people. I like spontaneous interaction. I like all that comes along with it, even the awkward, cringy, and upsetting moments. I like it. I'm fine with it, and I miss it to some extent, but not more than I miss not having to commute. I think if you have a short commute...
you also live far, far away from the city.
Well, about an hour. But I mean, the average commute for people, I think most people really despise their commute. I have no idea. I'd love to see
I'm with you on that.
Some data on that. And so the trade-offs for me, and I think other people are... And the other thing about just... I mean, we mentioned this, the nap thing. Like, I work solid 3 hours back to back. Then I go do something outside. I mow the lawn. I get in the garden for an hour. I go for a run. I drive my daughters around. I come back. I work for 6 hours. I work an hour here, half an hour. Like, it allows.
I do the same. I'm with you.
And I'm more productive than I would ever be doing a shift in an office.
Dude, it hasn't even been 6 months. It hasn't even been 6 months. And if you speak to the average person, I think they're fucking tired of being at home. I don't know what's going to be worse, the post-lockdown baby boom or the post-lockdown divorce boom. I keep hearing horrible stories from people who are having real difficulties just coping with everything. You know,
people. I read something today that people aren't having sex.
I wouldn't be surprised, but here
meaning there won't be a lot of babies born.
You're still here. Can't you go away from it?
Yeah.
But back to externalities. There's a reason the entire system developed with people leaving their houses and going to work. That is not a random accident. That happened because having a break between where you live and sleep and eat and where your kids and your spouse is and what you do to earn a living, you know, it used to be if you worked on a farm where most people worked, go back 100 years, right? It's called non-farm payrolls because originally the vast majority of people were busy trying to generate enough food to keep the whole country alive. You worked in the same place, you lived, you ate, there was a town, maybe you go in for supplies or the dance and meet somebody from another family to swap genes instead of dating within, you know, a narrow genetic group. You want to be able to open that up. But all that said, when the opportunity came to leave the farm, when the opportunity came to have a place of social capital and interaction.
I understand that, but I think you're making that up. I think that you're just making that kind of trend up to some extent without necessarily with data. And if I were to continue and if I were to talk
about no data yet,
well, I would say people want to go back to the farm. People are discovering the importance of nature right now. People don't want to go back into their commute, into their city centers and their offices and have to dress up and wear uncomfortable clothes and work all day. Now, I'm making that up completely. I don't know what the data is. I'm sure there are some people that do. But I think that you're discovering a new way to live that in many ways, there are trade-offs, but in many ways is better and more productive and less stressful. The commute is stressful.
So you're touching on something that I'm really fascinated by.
Look at the way houses are being sold all over in more rural areas.
Yeah.
People want
second houses or first houses. That's really the question.
That's a good question. I think a lot of them are second, it would seem.
So the pandemic and the lockdown has revealed a lot about society that I think was there all along and people were oblivious to it. So a couple of examples. I mean, America is a very economically unequal nation, but during lockdown, it became really clear how unequal we are.
Right. That
there are certain people who just have tremendous advantages and tremendous disadvantages. So that was a great reveal. I think, like you, a lot of people realized how much they hate their commute. And I think that they always hated their commute. They just kind of suppressed it and, hey, I got to go to work, I got to make the best of it. So I'm just going to compartmentalize this into a little box. If you've ever seen the Family Guy with the I'm a tumor, people kind of just suppress stuff and let it become this just
festering
cancerous
wound.
Thing.
Yeah.
Right. And they just kind of tough it out. And spending 3 months, especially over the summer, can I tell you, this summer was so hot in New York. I am thrilled not to have gone from a freezing train
that's another
to a boiling subway to a freezing office to it was not just like a heat wave for 10 days. It was 8 weeks of high 80s and occasionally 90. It was just brutal. So I think that a lot of these feelings that you're referencing are valid, and maybe there's going to be a reorganization of where people live and where people work. The idea of people commuting 2 hours each way is insane. Now, there have been a lot of issues with this. We have neglected our infrastructure. We have neglected our transportation grid.
Yep.
We have neglected our urban transport and our suburban transport. The United States commuting process is amongst the worst of the civilized world. And spend some time in Europe and take a train, or from what I've read about places like Japan and Taiwan and Singapore, their commuting, rail, and even automobile infrastructure is so much better than ours. In the 1950s, we led the world. And now, more than a half century later, we're at the back of the pack of the advanced nations, and even worse, if you look at it globally. So our commute is terrible, and it's gradually gotten worse over time. I think part of the blame for this goes to just not prioritizing infrastructure. And I have to tell you, the Democrats have done a terrible job defending the role of government in providing the sort of services that are essential. And I'll bring it back to the post office. This shouldn't be a debate. This should be so obvious that anybody who fucks with the post office should be run out of town on a rail. But we've done a terrible job as a nation, and the Democratic Party as the entity of more government has done a terrible job defending the very important role of government. And I keep coming back to the book, The Fifth Column by Michael Lewis, that just explains the things that people are just wholly unaware.
Part of that is because things have been going, smoothly for the most part for so long for a lot of people. And I mean, not necessarily opportunity, education, healthcare, racism and sexism and all these other things. I mean, things like the post office. When you get used to getting your packages, your medicine, your payment, on time, you eventually, after a generation of that mailman or woman coming every day at a certain time and expecting it, you start to take it for granted. And the Postal Service has the highest approval rating, I think, of any government agency. So I'm not sure what Democrats necessarily could have done to advocate more, because it wasn't that controversial of an argument. And by the way,
first of all, in 2005, we passed, or 2006, we passed legislation that basically fucked the post office.
Yeah, but why did they do that? I wrote a column
about that 2 or 3 years ago.
They did that, my understanding is because they don't like anything government does, and they want to privatize everything, and the people who do it generally have interests in the competitors.
Right. So how has the party of the government not done a good job, and in fact has done such a poor job in defending the proper role of government? For Grover Norquist to say, I want to get government so small that I could drown it in a bathtub, where is the pushback to that? Where are people saying, here is the government services that are essential? I don't see that sort of stuff elsewhere. I don't see that sort of stuff in Asia. I mean, I guess Maggie Thatcher in the UK But that was 40 years ago, 35 years ago. So
by the way,
I'm perplexed by this.
As we're talking about this, I just saw Trump just tweeted, "Save the post office." What is your reaction to that?
Listen, he's a fantastic gaslighter. Very few people can gaslight.
Define the gaslighting in terms of what you mean in this scenario.
Basically, convincing people they're crazy to pay attention to reality. For anybody to think that he has done anything other than do his utmost best. Now I will admit to being perplexed as to why he's against the post office, because historically mail-in votes have helped Republican. Who tends to do mail-in voters? People, mail-in voting, military, people in rural areas, older people. Historically, those demographics tend to vote Republican. So
I can explain it to you, and I bet you haven't. Maybe you haven't thought about this. It's
let's hear it. Is it just to undercut the validity of the election?
Yes.
All
yes.
right.
If he knew, and he may not have, that the statistic that you just said about historically voting by mail benefits Republicans, then he might have thought twice about it. But even if he did know that, he realizes what the polls are saying in the states that matter, and then it looks like he's going to get shellacked. But even if it draws closer, as most elections do, he still wants to prepare for the rigged election statement that he can say. So he always does this. He prepares his lies. He starts making them up.
He talked about how rigged the 2016 election was.
Well, I mean,
and then
listen.
he won.
Over and how often did he discredit the Mueller investigation before the Mueller investigation, which leaked nothing? They leaked nothing. And he just discredited it and called it a hoax every day, increasingly, so that no matter when it came out, that's what it would be. And it's exactly what he's doing with the election.
Maybe. Could very well be. The
Could
problem
very
is
well
that
be. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. I don't know. Could be. Couldn't be. Could be. Could be a QAnon. Might not be a QAnon.
Historically, you've had people that you disagree with, but they're not salting the earth behind them. They understand the value of government, and they understand what essential services is, and none of those norms apply. And it's not just a matter of shaking it up. It's a matter of just flailing and doing a half-assed job. Look, we're going to be, by the time we get to election, we're going to be somewhere between 200 and 300,000 Americans dead, of which, depending on which study you believe, better leadership could have prevented 50, 70, 90% of those deaths. How many people died of Ebola in America? Was it 2?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
So had this been managed better at every level, but really the buck has to stop at the top. The first responsibility of the president is to keep the country safe and keep the population from dying. The Times the other day had a piece out that said, hey, compared to year-over-year data, we have 200,000 more deaths than the previous year. And that doesn't count people driving so much less than they usually. So maybe it's even more deaths. So what are the numbers? 165? It's probably in real numbers by the time the election rolls around. It's probably going to be closer to 300. That's just an insane number. It's insane.
You gotta take a moment to let that marinate. You can't move past. It is what it is. You know what it is. What it is. Okay.
It's worse than what it is. It's just horrifying. It is horrifying. So people think, I've had people say to me, listen, I understand your politics is very different from Trump's. I go, this is not about politics. This is about competency and basic functionality.
Yeah. Well, his politics aren't conservative politics either. I mean, it's not in any way traditional.
They're flexible.
Yeah. It has to do with whatever he thinks is going to work for him. I saw this yesterday somewhere, but it's, I'm sure a lot of people have said this, but the idea of making something great again is actually to destroy it or personally profit from it. That's how it should be translated. He's like, we're going to make the U.S. Post Office great again. Like, no, you're going to destroy it, or you're going to try to sell it off. Your Postmaster General is invested in its competitors. I mean, that's
which by the way, the Inspector General is already on, so you can expect that Inspector General to get fired soon enough.
Oh, right, yeah.
We'll see. All right. Well, anything else? I've had you for like almost an hour. I appreciate it.
Is it what time is it?
Your podcast got some kind of good mention somewhere, right?
Yeah,
What's going on with the podcast? Masters in Business, everybody. Subscribe now.
15 podcasts financial advisors should listen to. It showed up the other day.
Nice.
And then another one that came out, I just saw today, 50 must-listen to podcasts. So
very good.
I have some really interesting people teed up. Mandel Crawley is head of the private wealth management group at Morgan Stanley. He's a fascinating guy, probably the highest ranking African-American in the finance industry. As a kid in high school, gets an internship at Morgan Stanley, and 20 years later is running their whole private bank. It's the biggest profit engine of the whole Morgan Stanley. Just fascinating. And then the week after that is a gentleman who is the head of ETFs at Barclays iShares. $2.3 trillion they manage.
Good
just
Lord.
That group manages. Yeah. So indexing and ETFs at iShares. So some really fascinating people teed up in the coming months. And to me, it's just my favorite thing I do all week. It's a privilege to hunt these people down and find them. My favorite sort of guest is a person who is enormously influential and important, and nobody has ever heard of them because they're not necessarily the face on TV. And so both of those people I've just mentioned, it's kind of a rare and fascinating sort of thing to find somebody. Salim Ramji is the guy at BlackRock, and Mandel Crawley is the guy at Morgan Stanley. And this week, the woman who was just on this past weekend, Claudia Sahm, invented what's called the Sahm Rule, SAHM, which is how you can tell when you're in a recession in real time. Normally, we wait for the NBER to give us the official date. She came up with a formula, and it works really well. And it's a tremendous assistance to policymakers who don't have to wait a year or two to say, hey, should we respond to this? They can respond 1 or 2 months into a recession rather than waiting, a year. And that's an important. So finding these people, it's really kind of interesting. Yeah. And then bringing them to a broader audience, I just have so much fun with that.
I do the same thing, and I love to do it. And I love to have people like you on as often as possible because people get to know you and get to trust you. And I think, it's. I'm glad to hear you. I'm glad to hear you say.
I normally get emails. Must you curse so much? I'm like, fucking Pete brings it out of me.
At Ritholtz, tweet him, email him, and complain.
I would be remiss if I did not thank Pete Dominic for having me on the show. Our producer is. I do a whole credits at the end of the podcast, and I'm always shocked that anyone even listens that far in. Because by then it's an hour and a half in. Yeah. Every now and then I'll say something just to see if anybody's.
I do the same sometimes. I drop a little nugget in. Tidbit. Yeah, it's interesting on this show because I usually have 2 or 3 guests, and I hate to put. I don't know how people listen to podcasts. So they listen to one guest first or the other guest, but they're always to me of equal importance and great. So you always hope, but in between you drop little things in and at the end in hopes that people are listening and will respond. And they do, and I love it. Love it.
Today I learned Pete Dominic and Mrs. Dominic sleep in separate beds.
You're about to learn something else. She also didn't take my name. So
I kind of knew. I forgot. Mrs. Pete is really what I was trying to say.
She doesn't like that either,
all right,
surprisingly enough.
Separate beds. That kind of blows my mind.
Oh, it's so great.
Separate rooms.
It's so much better. I tell you.
So I see we're still recording, but I have to ask. So
about sex,
honey, are you awake? How does that work?
Sex?
Yeah,
the whole thing is in my stand-up act to my new album I've yet to release. It's like a 20-minute chunk, but I mean, like with sex, when you have, I don't know about you guys don't have kids, but you're married for a certain amount of time.
We have dogs,
but I think most married couples, especially when their kids are our kids' age. You have sex when the kids aren't around or up or home.
So they're asleep.
Yeah, and
don't your kids go to sleep each night?
Not way after we do now.
But the other thing is,
really?
the other thing is like about
Doesn't your door shut? So if like her door is closed and your door's open, the kids are like, "Mommy and Daddy are doing it."
I mean, I don't care. By the way, we don't care if they knew. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's
just leave the door open then.
The point is, you just don't.
You don't want to traumatize the kids.
You don't. This is what it does. It makes sex less fun, less enjoyable when you know that you kind of have to be quiet or you don't want them to, it's just weird to have them around. So you're going to have sex when the kids generally aren't home or when they're asleep. Yes, when they're younger. And you're not having sex. I mean, are couples that are married over 20 years having sex when they wake up? No. One of you has to take a dump and you're going to be honest about it, number one. And number two, at night, one of you is more tired. So, I mean, I don't know. When is the time of day that the average long married together couple has sex, and
Date night.
And has it changed in the quarantine time? Because you can have sex a lot easier now when you're both home. You're both home.
You're just both sick of seeing each other.
Maybe, yes. So maybe you're having less sex.
The beauty of going to work is you create a little bit of a whoever's not there can miss the other one.
I think there's some truth to that. There is. All right. Well, we ended on marital sex behavior, which is fine.
You can include that crap in it?
Oh,
that's
yeah.
hilarious.
Why not? I want to hear from everybody that's listening. I want to hear what they think about that. Right. If they think it's weird.
So I'm curious how long married couples who have been together for 20 years, how often they have sex.
And what it's like. I'm curious about all of that. Yeah.
Oh, I don't want to know what it's like. I don't really care about their perversions. I got my own.
I don't care about their perversions. It's just like generally, is it still great? Is it better? Do you really enjoy it? Do you try new things? How do you keep it interesting?
Oh, all right. I see what you're saying.
I mean, there's entire shows dedicated to that kind of thing. But
have you done an entire show? You must have.
No, I haven't. I should.
You should, and I would like to see that stand-up routine.
I did have
you discussing this.
Dan Savage on talking about sex during the pandemic. That was really
good.
I should have him back. He's so great. I love Dan Savage. Do you know Dan Savage? He's the greatest.
I know of him tangentially.
So funny. He's so great on Twitter.
Yeah, I've seen his stuff. I follow him on Twitter.
Podcast is great. Love the dude.
All right, man.
All right. Thank you very much, pal.
My best to Mrs. Pete, and I hope she enjoys. I hope she enjoys her quiet time. And
she certainly does.
Now I got to see if I could sneak in and sneak out without waking you.
She texts us all good night, the three of us.
Get out of here.
Yeah, we have a family text like, going to bed, good night, everybody, just in case, and usually the girls will go down.
Come on.
Yeah. Yeah. And we have this little house, but we have a group text that we text each other from the other room.
And tell the truth, you were banished to that.
No,
that
I chose
studio.
it. No. Oh, no. Nope. The studio was definitely my choice. I had to get out of the garage studio that had no windows and no air conditioning.
Yeah, I could see.
And I wanted to be literally closer to nature, and I wanted these windows. And I'm out looking at my garden while I'm talking to you. And to me,
I got the same view out the back.
It's the greatest.
It's lovely.
It's the greatest. I got to go put the carpet down now.
All right, man.
All right. I love you. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
All right, bye. And that is it at Ritholtz. That was good. I like that. I could talk to him forever, asking questions about anything forever. People love when he joins the program. And I think you got a good selection today, huh? Joe the Mailman, John Avlon, Barry Ritholtz. Yeah, there were 3 white guys. But a good selection of topics. And I got some great guests that are at least scheduled to join me this week, including Erin Brockovich, actress and game show host and all-around amazing woman, Jane Lynch. I'm supposed to be talking with comedian and director and writer, the great David Alan Grier. Just a few names that I've got scheduled this week. Hopefully it works out, and always a lot of surprises I end up booking on the day of. And, of course, I'm really excited about finishing up the Shedio and getting it all completely operational. We're going to go big with video, and I got to get a $3,000 computer, apparently. That is going to be a real big hit, but I guess it's vitally necessary to do the type of video I want to do. I got to get this MacBook Pro. If anybody has a MacBook Pro they want to sell or give away, you just let me know, standuprepeat@gmail.com. I guess it's got to be, I don't know, it's got to be something. We'll figure it out. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast. If you haven't signed up for a subscription yet, do now. Just head over to patreon.com/Pete Dominic or click on the paid subscription words on the show links wherever you're listening to the podcast, and sign up there. I hope to see you Thursday night at 8 o'clock. A lot of new subscribers potentially going to join us there. Always a good time connecting with all of you, reminding each other that we aren't alone, and we are going to build this community into something very special as we try to navigate ourselves through this unprecedented time in American history. Thank you very much for listening. I love you. I'll talk to you tomorrow.